Instrumentalist, educator, and composer Glenn McClure has had a varied and colorful career with an ecological focus to his music. Let's meet him now to talk a little bit more about his wonderful career. Please say hello to Glenn McClure. Thanks, Glenn, for joining us here in the Spotlight today.
Great. Thank you for having me. And, there's another room that has all the musical instruments and the books in it that they call my studio, but the kitchen here is another kind of studio where a lot of music happens. So that's where I'm broadcasting from today.
Wonderful to see you right at home. That's great. So I mentioned at the beginning that you're an instrumentalist, and when I first learned about you, you were playing the hammered dulcimer, I think.
Yeah. You're here down in Livingston County in York, New York. Grew up with a lot of traditional musicians around me, and there were old-time Scotch-Irish players playing, jigs and reels, and old-time Italian players playing tarantellas and Italian wedding dances and all of that. And my home was a bit of a sort of the second town hall here in York. And so a lot of things happened on our porch, and a lot of things happened in our living room as my mother was churning out food for everybody. And so being in the midst of a lot of those traditional musicians was a big part of my life. And also my parents worked in, they did healthcare in the regional migrant camps. And so I also grew up, every Tuesday night going out to those camps and hearing Puerto Rican merengue, hearing Southern singing, hearing all this Mexican music, all those kinds of things, as I was just playing with the kids while my parents did the healthcare, and so much later on, after I went through music school as a oboe player and saxophone player and all of that it became clear to me that when I decided to be a composer, when I decided to write my own music, that world had to be part of it in some way, and it continues to inform it and inspire it in lots of different ways.
And I believe you can hear that in some of the more recent works, even, for instance, your Adirondack Folk Opera, which is pretty new, I think.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing where, as a composer, there are plenty of times where I'm sitting, in my studio or my kitchen, just writing music which is coming out of the inside of me, of my own intellectual and emotional, and lived experience. But I much prefer sort of being out and chatting with folks and learning their stories and finding ways that, as a composer, I can be useful. I can be useful in helping to tell somebody else's story, not just mine. Right. And in the Adirondacks, a handful of years ago, this new research uncovered this amazing pre-Civil War voting rights story that happened up there in the High Peaks region. We think of New York State as a free state in the whole Civil War discussion, but it was a free state with voting suppression laws, that still favored white men voting versus black men voting, and black men had to own 40 acres of land before they could walk into the voting booth. And so some abolitionists got together, some Rochester folks we think about here, included Frederick Douglass in the discussion, and some other famous ones like John Brown. They worked with some other folks and decided to fulfill that law by giving away 120,000 acres of Adirondack farmland to about 3,000 black men and their families. And these families moved up into a very harsh wilderness, hard to be a farmer up there, even if you knew what you were doing, and a lot of them had other jobs beforehand. And so it's such a courageous story of men and women, sacrificing so much to simply have the right to vote, for which we pride ourselves here on this country. And that project has blossomed over the years. We had the choral suite performances with you and the Rochester Oratorio Society and Jerry Floriano down at SUNY Geneseo. And now we're doing a once over on the libretto, and I think we'll have a final score and libretto ready by this fall to shop around a little bit.
Now, isn't that wonderful? I mean, there must be oral history or folk memory, sort of a collective memory of a project like that in an area like the Adirondacks, where it's very concentrated. For instance, families have been there for a long time.
Oh, yes, and in very profound and very timely ways, actually. For the libretto itself, I'm working with Gerard Lee, marvelous librettist, and about a third of the libretto is actually extant texts from people that lived through this time, and the John Brown Farm up in the Adirondacks, the place where Brown and his sons are buried. Is a great receptacle of a lot of these texts. We've had new scholars coming out with rather extensive books about this history, and but most recently there have been some folks up there who've gotten interested in the story and looked at place names and some of the ways in which the heritage of this had been memorialized in a way that we in our modern sensibilities do not find acceptable. Okay, and so I worked with a couple folks, and we were able to get to the U.S. Geological Survey and actually change the name of one of the small creeks up there.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Yeah, that was named with a rather offensive name, and changed it to the name of John Thomas. Okay, one of these frontier farmers that went up there and successfully built a farm and also got to vote in the state of New York.
Well, congratulations. That relieves one long-term injury there.
Yeah.
But, those stories are pretty astounding. I think you had another similarly astounding story behind the opera Imoinda that you wrote some years ago.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. It was such it was one of those projects that goes down as living, the most deeply in my heart. We had a year. We had a year with one particular class at the School of the Arts in the Rochester City School District. Okay, with Alan Tire, who was the administrator, and a young student right out of the Eastman School of Music, Sarah Madison, who now many people in Rochester know as Sarah Stabell. Okay, because she is the choral director in the Brighton High School, and also she's running a community choir over at Nazareth College these days too. A brilliant choral director. But we had a year with a group of students, and in the first half of the year, starting in September, we took this story of this profound story coming from an early neo-slave narrative by an author named Afra Ben, and it was a story of a West African prince and princess who are kidnapped into slavery. And so they go from their place of power and privilege to now being slaves and thrown into a country, into a new world, okay, which is proposing this notion of equality, but then they are enslaved, and how is it that they build forward these big ideas even in their limited capacity, okay, because of the structures around them. And this story ended up being the focal point of so many profound discussions with high school students at the School of the Arts that I know Sarah and I will remember till the end of our days of the ways in which these students were balancing their lives and their really, really tough decisions that they were facing, in Rochester, in the lives where they live, bouncing those experiences off of this story, and in the process helping to write the music for the show.
And did you perform it then?
Yeah. We started with a blank musical page in September, and then the show went up in May, and it was just astonishing. The whole team of folks over there. It was a year that I will never forget as a creator, for all I learned and for all of the people that rolled up their sleeves and made that big thing possible.
Isn't that amazing? I'm sure some lives were changed along the way for the students as well. Isn't that fantastic? And
I can only attest to mine. So,
the slave narratives of Olaud Equiano that you have worked with, there are similar lessons in there, and that's an astounding story.
Yeah, there's so much richness, I think, for us to go back and look at these primary sources, to actually hear the words of the people that lived through it. Okay, and I think we as artistic creators have an opportunity to share those in new and exciting ways. Okay, and as a composer that likes to work in a collaborative kind of environment, it's I find it just so energizing to toss out a text to a group of people and say, let's talk about it, and say, well, gee, what's the way that we present this text today? Okay, what is the kind of music that tells this story today? Okay, and it's such a privileged place to be as a sort of socially engaged composer.
Well, now, sometimes in a concentrated environment, for instance, a community in the Adirondacks, greater ecological issues, corporate exploitation and whatnot, has a very powerful local effect, and that's an interesting story to tell. I think you've told that story sometimes in your own music. Yeah.
Again, I'm a bit of a I really like creating stuff in the midst of conversations with other folks. Okay, and the stuff we've been talking about, it's been history and literature people, but on the science world, to be with the scientists that are doing the urgent work that we have today. Okay, on environmental issues, on the ways in which we as humans need to find a new relationship with the natural world. Okay, and that's an urgent task right now. I end up hanging out with a lot of really smart, really fun, interesting people in my job, and so in the Adirondacks, okay, working with the climatologist Kurt Stager from Paul Smith's College, we. For a couple of different projects, we've looked at some of the data he's gathered, okay, from core samples from a place called Wolf Lake in the Adirondacks. It's considered one of the most pristine of the lakes in the Adirondack Park, the least touched, okay, of those lakes by human industry or activity or that kind of thing. And so he takes students out in canoes, okay, and they drop these tubes down into the bottom of the lake, and they sink it into the bottom of the lake, and then pull up the core samples, and once you lay those things out, okay, that tube of dirt and other stuff right now is layered with every year. And he can test the material at each level in that tube that goes back in time. And so Kurt has environmental data from Wolf Lake that goes back to the time before the Roman Empire in Wolf Lake in the Adirondacks. Okay, and so it's astonishing to see how that bunch of numbers starts to tell a long form story of what that natural space is. And so like for the Adirondack Folk Opera project, well, one of the things we were able to do was to take the years of that project, was the 1840s and 50s, and we took the data from Steger's core samples from those years, okay, and when Lyman Epps, the lead character in it is singing the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson about the beauty of the Adirondacks. Okay, the underlying music over there is the translation of those numbers into melodies and harmonies. So the nature itself becomes part of it, becomes embedded in the music. It's not just me responding to it as an individual. It's an empirical presence of that nature in the musical score.
That's amazing. The data actually informs the music.
Yeah. Right. And it's the sort of thing where it's called sonification. Okay. And there are some versions of sonification that are very rigid and very mathematical. Okay, where every music that comes out of the final piece, okay, is generated through this mathematical digital process. And I've done some of that work, and oh my God, it's so challenging to me to work in that kind of aesthetic environment. It really pulls and yanks me in ways that is exciting and terrifying and hard and all. My sort of go-to process is to use the sonification to create melodies and harmonies, the core materials of music making, and then I just take those things and then expand those out, doing the work of what a composer does with core source material.
Mm-hmm. And where else have you had that opportunity to work with the data of where science and music meet?
Yeah, had a chance to work with the flight dynamics team from the Rosetta mission and the European Space Agency in Darmstadt, Germany. Space news fans out there, okay, will recall that the Rosetta mission was the first time human beings flew a spacecraft out into deep space, in this case for 9 years, and encountered a comet that happened to be flying by and dropped a lander on top of the comet, right? And therefore was able to study this comet for the first time by actually touching it, okay, with our human technology. And the human story behind flying this thing for 9 years and encountering that comet is just astonishing. And so I took some of the flight dynamics data, the positional data of the orbiter from the day that it encountered the comet for the first time. And again, with this rather simple math, okay, there's no mathematical processes that are more complicated than what you learned in 4th grade, okay, in order to do this translation, that each of those data points turned into a musical note that not only created melodies, but also created this astonishingly passionate harmony, okay, once you put 4 of them together with a soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And so I wrote a piece for the European Space Agency choir. Because yes, the European Space Agency has a choir. It also has a theater group. It also has a dance group and visual arts stuff. The Europeans embrace that connection between the arts and sciences much more than we Americans have done in the past. And great to work with them. Another place where had some astonishing experiences was on the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica with a team from the Scripps Oceanographic Institute that had been studying the movement of the Ross Ice Shelf as it responds to the water pressure underneath that comes from volatile weather, everywhere around the planet. And so they had these seismometers in the ice shelf, and once we went out in the snowmobiles and pulled these things out of the ice and uploaded the data, like one of the things we noticed was that when the tsunami happened in Fukushima in Japan, the Ross Ice Shelf did this. Because the whole planet is connected, right? And as a composer, that notion is just so profound to me, because as composers, we often look for ways to write music that connect things that are separated by other definitions, by other reasons. And here was the top of the planet that was affecting the bottom of the planet, and it was such a profound story. And hanging out with those scientists on the bottom of the world was just astonishing. Actually, just one quick little extra vignette. I was down there and sort of fumbling through all of, I didn't know what time zone I was in or whatever it was in the first couple of days. And I was in my sort of field survival classes. And third day in, the marvelous woman who is helping to manage my project, who is now a dear friend, Elaine Hood, she approached me at the end of the class and she walked up and she says, "Do you play Scottish music?" And I said, well, yeah, I grew up with a lot of old-time Scotch-Irish players. Sure, I can play some stuff. I said, but I don't have any instruments. We're at the bottom of the planet. And she said, well, that's not a problem. We have a whole room full of instruments over here. Isn't that interesting, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I said, Elaine, why do you need Scottish music? And she says, well, Gordon Hamilton, one of the most celebrated of our scientists in the last decade, he was a huge fan of Scottish culture, and wasn't a religious man by any sort of outside measure, and he was, and we just got word today that he was out with his team, and his snowmobile fell into a crevasse and he was killed, and we need to put together a memorial service for him at the bottom of the planet. And so here, 3 days into being at the bottom of the planet, I found myself as a musician doing the same things that I do up here in Geneseo, in Rochester, in the rest of the world, and by being part of this human world that of unbelievably courageous people that oftentimes sacrifice so much to get the information the rest of the world needs these days. So it was an astonishing experience down there. Yeah.
Well, now tell us what you have just over the horizon. Speaking of not geographical terms, what's over the horizon for you, Glenn?
There's a couple of opera stories I'm working on right now. Okay, one is a retelling of the old Hephaestus story from the ancient Greeks, the god with the disability. Okay, and going back and exploring that story a little bit. Another project which we've gotten some help on in its sort of early phases through Humanities New York and through Genesee Valley Council on the Arts and NISCA is something called the Redemption Center. Okay, I know here in the Rochester area, we often take our cans back, okay, to Wegmans, and we go into that little extra room, and they have sort of a machine that does that. Lots of other places you go to, they actually have a sort of a human space where you bring your cans and get your 5 cents for them, and that's a redemption center. And so I've been playing with that idea a little bit of saying, okay, well, what does it mean for us to sort of confront our relationship with the environment and the damage humans have done to that. What does it mean to be redeemed from that? And to start to explore that story in a fun, sort of upbeat, a sort of gospel jazz piece, okay, that is has the working title of the Redemption Center right now. And then the other sort of really, really local story is here down in the town that I grew up in. Some recent historical work has found that it was it's the first commercial winery in the state of New York, and that was surrounded by the Civil War, and an astonishing story of the family of this that owned this vineyard that enlisted in the Union Army as a musician and came back and took over the vineyard, but of course with the struggles of what we would now call PTSD and the other movements of progress that eventually destroyed his vineyard. He died by suicide. And so it's this astonishingly passionate, yes, I would say operatic story, okay, of wine and war and veteran stories and things like that. So I'm having a lot of fun talking to folks about that one too.
And so it's the power of music to change our attitudes about ecology and also about each other, it seems to me. It comes through your music.
Yeah, I'm interested in helping people tell their stories. And I think that in this kind of folk opera world, we have lots of opportunity and uncharted territory to begin to tell ecological stories, rural stories, those stories that have not yet made it onto the main stage. So.
Well, now, if people want to have you come tell those stories or tell the experience of that to their corporation or to their event, can they do that? Would you go out and speak to people?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm doing that in a bunch of different configurations these days. And so if folks go to the website, okay, artforbrains.com, ARTFORBRAINS, and just shoot me a message through the contact page there. Would love to see what we might be able to cook up together.
The website is artforbrains.com. That's right. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I wish you very much luck in coming times. I know you've been to the Czech Republic. We'll be talking about that in a future show. But for today, that's plenty, Glenn, and it's been an exciting career so far. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today in the Spotlight. My guest has been Glenn McClure. He's currently living in Geneseo, New York. He's an instrumentalist, educator, and a composer with an ecological focus. It's wonderful to speak to him. Thanks again, Glenn, for all your time today.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yep.
Great to see you again.